Year 11s, we're going to now be looking at our introduction to the respiratory system. So this is our breathing system. We are pretty much exclusively going to focus on mammalian breathing systems or mammalian respiratory systems, predominantly because they're the most simple for us to understand, but they also follow the same sort of pathway, the same pattern as all other breathing systems of multicellular organisms. So our first slide we're looking at here. Why do organisms need to exchange gases? So exchange occurs between an organism's internal environment and its external environment. We're going to just do a quick diagram for now, where we're just going to quickly define that difference. There's definitions obviously that I've got for you that you can print out or that you've got in front of you. We're just going to do a diagrammatic representation of it. So, because you're all deeply aware of my drawing skills, we're going to stick to a tree. Now, the internal environment of this tree is everything within the boundaries of the organism. So the leaves, the trunk, the branches, this is all the internal environment. Doesn't matter how large the organism is, unless it's got an intellect like we do, it can't change the external environment. It can only change the internal environment. The external environment obviously then is everything surrounding this tree. Which is just going to represent this in green. So here is our external environment. Now, exchange happens between these two environments. In a unicellular organism, the internal environment is the intracellular fluid. They're the same thing. In multicellular organisms, the internal environment is the extracellular fluid. So in the case of our tree, this is our ECF. If we've got, I'll just quickly draw it here, if we've just got a single cell, so this is our bacteria, this is internal, but it's also the cytosol. The external portion here is our ECF, as well as being external. So, there's a couple of differences in the specificities here. When we have a multicellular organism, the internal environment is the extracellular fluid. The external environment is the environment that the organism lives in. For a unicellular organism, it's slightly different. Because they are only made up of one cell, the internal environment is their cytosol, is the fluid within the cell, and the external environment is the ECF. So the question is, how might the external environment impact the method of exchange? If you've got a different external environment, so let's say you're a unicellular organism and you are swimming around in fluid, in a pond, compared to us, how might that impact the method of exchange? We'll discuss that again in class. So carbon dioxide, oxygen, gases that the majority of organisms need to exchange. There are some subtle differences, and obviously there are some gases that we produce that we need to get out of our bodies, but they're the main ones that we're certainly talking about in this case. Absolutely, for the respiratory system, it's only CO2 and oxygen we're going to consider. Depending on the external environment, the concentration of these gases will change. There's a lot more oxygen in the air at 20-21% than there is in the water, which is something like 0.2 or 0.5 or something percent. So massive difference. Most organisms need oxygen in order to complete a process called aerobic cellular respiration, and they need to remove carbon dioxide because it's a waste product. So here we've got our equation. You need to memorize and know this equation. C6H12O6 is glucose, plus 6O2, oxygen, leads to 6 CO2, so 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and 6 H2O water molecules. That happens in virtually every living organism. Now there are some subtle differences, but we'll just consider that it occurs across all living organisms. Autotrophs, such as plants, undergo this other process, photosynthesis. And this requires carbon dioxide and produces oxygen, although the oxygen is not always considered a waste product because the cell can sometimes use it. So this follows the exact reverse process of aerobic respiration. 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules gives us 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. They are the inverse of each other. If you've ever heard the idea that the plants or trees are the lungs of the planet, or rainforests are the lungs of the planet, this is why. Because they produce oxygen for us. They give us the oxygen that we need, just like the lungs in our bodies do. So in photosynthesis, which creates chemical energy in the form of glucose, so it's stored in glucose, and respiration, which uses this chemical energy for cellular processes, gas exchange is crucial. Earlier we looked at the using microscopes practical, where everybody had an examination of a leaf structure, and you saw those little pockets. Giving away the answer, those little pockets are areas for gas to move into or out of. So those are almost like the lungs of the plant. They store the gases or allow the gases to diffuse into those spaces so that it's easier for the surrounding cells to get access to them. Because the leaf cell is not one cell thick, it's several cells thick. So it needs to have those little pockets to increase the amount of oxygen or carbon dioxide that these plants, these leaf cells are exposed to. Alright, we're going to do that activity later, but what we will observe with that is that in aerobic organisms, the amount of energy available is directly proportional to the rate at which oxygen can be taken from the external environment. Now, that's a lot of fancy speak really for just saying that the more energy you need, the faster you have to breathe. This means that you're getting more oxygen in. It also means, as the second point sort of illustrates, that you will need to get rid of more oxygen. You don't just breathe in faster, you breathe out faster. So as carbon dioxide concentration increases, so as we exercise and we're going through this process of aerobic respiration, we're using oxygen, producing carbon dioxide as well as energy, but producing carbon dioxide as a waste. This carbon dioxide dissolves in water and it creates an acid. This acid lowers the pH of the internal environment of the extracellular fluid, and it will eventually damage the organism if left unchecked. So in air-breathing organisms like us, the CO2 concentration is the immediate measure for whether to increase ventilation, whether to increase the rate of breathing, breathing being in and out. Because the pH changes far more rapidly than oxygen saturation. In fact, our bodies aren't really able to pick up a change in oxygen concentration until we're around about 90% oxygen concentration. But at that stage, we're in considerable respiratory distress. So we need our oxygen concentration to stay between 100 and 98% to feel comfortable. If we drop anywhere below that, we start to feel uncomfortable. Chest starts getting tight, we start to get a bit panicked, our brain might start to make some unusual decisions, and much below 94 or 93%, we start to feel faint and potentially we may actually pass out. The gases are exchanged via this process of diffusion, and it occurs across a moist membrane. Now, we're going to leave that sentence there because we're going to go in the next video into more detail about the lungs specifically. But in our bodies, as air breathers, we are actually monitoring carbon dioxide concentration far more closely or far more rapidly than we are oxygen saturation, because oxygen saturation isn't actually a good enough representation or a good enough indication of what's going on in our bodies. So we're looking specifically now at gas exchange, and we're coming towards the very end of this video now. Some animals are able to breathe through their skin because the exchange surface, that is the space between the external and internal environment, is very thin. Remember that thing that we talked about with diffusion, because this is all diffusion that we're considering. The thickness of the membrane determines rate of diffusion. So if the exchange surface is thin and near the surface, then you're able to breathe through your skin. Frogs do this. But when we're handling frogs, we need to keep their skin moist. Our skin is naturally quite drying. It's desiccating. It'll suck the moisture off of the frog's skin. So we keep spraying the frog so that they can actually continue to breathe. Most animals usually require a sort of system to increase surface area for exchange because the exchange surface is too thick. If you imagine, if you're trying to get oxygen to something, say like your stomach, it's got to go through maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 centimeters, depending on your size, of skin. Gas doesn't do a very good job of diffusing across that much surface area, or that much membrane. So we need to have some kind of system, and a very efficient system, to get our air into our bodies. The system is often an organ, or in fact in our case an organ system, that consists of either internal or external expansions of epithelial tissue. So it's either that we have an incredibly complex internal system, like we do, or a complex external system, like axolotls do, or salamanders do, where they actually breathe, they have their lungs, or effectively their gills, really, on the outside of their bodies. So some quick features of gas exchange, or of efficient gas exchange. The first is surface area should be as large as is possible. The barrier should be as thin as possible, so we're talking about hopefully 1, maximum 2 cells thick. The supply of gas needs to be controlled, so we need to be able to monitor it, we need to be able to alter the rate of, or the supply of gas, so the rate of our breathing in our case. Once transfer has actually occurred, we should be able to move those substances efficiently, so move carbon dioxide, move the oxygen. In large animals, ventilation and blood circulation is achieved by consuming energy. So in order to have an efficient system, ventilation and blood flow should be matched. So that is really, breathing rate should actually match your heart rate. And then this will maintain desired concentration gradients while also minimizing energy waste. So just the last little bit here, the last slide. Gas exchange organs vary massively from species to species. Structure, complexity, related to size, activity, body temperature, respiratory medium. But some common features. The membranes are high, so we have a very high surface area. They are moist, so they're normally covered or surrounded by water, and they're thin. They need to be protected from damage and supported to prevent collapse under the pressures experienced, and we'll talk about that. And in land-based animals, terrestrial animals, they need to maintain those moist respiratory membranes, and will have mechanisms to prevent drying, dehydration of these membranes. Remember, we're breathing air in. Air is dry. So we need to be consistently producing some sort of liquid in order to keep that moist membrane. Okay, once again, brings us to the end of our video for today, Year 11s. Again, please write notes, ask questions, email, in class, on Canvas, doesn't really matter, but you need to be keeping up with this sort of thing. Thank you.